He laughed as he signed my bonus check, a fraction of what I'd earned for the company. Then came the words that changed everything. It's just a rounding error, really. A rounding error. 4 years of building a $120 million client portfolio reduced to a mathematical insignificance. That day, I didn't just receive a check, I received a reason to rewrite the rules of the game. My name is Jane Hartley, and I've spent the last 4 years of my life building something extraordinary at Brennick Capital. At 37, I'd already outlasted 3 male predecessors in the Director of Business Development role, each of whom had fled within 18 months, unable to crack the notoriously conservative Midwest market. But I didn't just crack it, I owned it. The numbers spoke louder than any boardroom presentation ever could. $120 million in client assets under management, cultivated from relationships I'd nurtured with the precision of a master gardener. CEOs who wouldn't return calls from our senior partners answered my texts within minutes. CFOs who played golf with Gordon Wexler every Sunday trusted me with their company's futures over $18 salads at quiet lunch meetings. But in Gordon's eyes, I was nothing more than a well-dressed calculator, useful for generating revenue, invisible when it came to strategy. He'd introduce me at client dinners as our girl in business development, his hand hovering possessively near my shoulder, never quite touching but always implying ownership. The men would chuckle knowingly while I smiled and memorized their names, their weaknesses, their ambitions. The Brennick Capitol building stood like a glass monument to masculine ego in downtown Chicago, 42 floors of steel and testosterone. The executive floor, where I should have had an office, remained a boys' club, complete with leather chairs that reeked of cigars and single malt. My workspace sat 1 floor below, a deliberate architectural reminder of my place in the hierarchy. Every morning, I'd arrive at 6:30 a.m., an hour before Gordon, and review the portfolios. I knew every client's birthday, their kids' college choices, their secret worries about market volatility. When Johnson Electronics considered pulling their $15 million account after a bad quarter, I was the one who talked them down over coffee and homemade cookies I'd baked specifically because I knew Jim Johnson's mother used to make the same recipe. Gordon took credit for that save in the Monday partners meeting. I sat in the back row, taking notes on my laptop, watching him describe my work as if he'd been the one losing sleep over retention strategies. The year-end bonus meeting was scheduled for December 15th, a Friday afternoon when half the office had already mentally checked out for the holidays. I'd worn my best suit, the charcoal Armani that made me feel like armor, and prepared my numbers. 4 years of consistent growth, 0 client attrition, the highest revenue per relationship in the firm's history. I thought those numbers would finally speak loud enough to pierce through the fog of casual misogyny that clouded the executive floor. I thought this would be the year they'd see me as more than just a useful tool in a skirt. I was wrong. The conference room had been decorated for the holidays. Tasteful silver and blue arrangements that someone's assistant had probably spent hours selecting. 14 men sat around the mahogany table, their bonus envelopes arranged like place cards at a wedding. Mine sat at the far end, my name printed in the same font as everyone else's, but somehow looking smaller. Gordon Wexler commanded the head of the table like a king holding court. At 58, he'd perfected the art of corporate intimidation, silver hair precisely styled, cufflinks worth more than most people's cars, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd inherited Brennick Capital from his father-in-law, but spoke as if he'd built it from scratch. "Gentlemen," he began, pointedly ignoring my presence, "it's been an exceptional year." He launched into his prepared speech about market performance, strategic wins, and the firm's positioning for the upcoming quarter. I'd heard variations of this speech 4 times now, each year watching my male colleagues receive their rewards while I waited for whatever scraps they'd decided I deserved. When he finally reached the bonus distribution, Gordon made a show of personally handing each envelope to the men around the table. Handshakes, shoulder pats, inside jokes about golf handicaps and yacht purchases. Tom Bradley, who'd lost 2 major accounts this year, received his with a laugh and a promise to hit them harder next quarter. Marcus Chen, whose biggest achievement was being Gordon's racquetball partner, got a wink and a nudge about his new Tesla. Then Gordon reached my envelope. He didn't stand. Instead, he slid it down the table like a bartender passing a beer, letting it stop just short of the edge. I had to reach to catch it. "Jane's had a decent year," he announced to the room, already turning his attention back to the others. "Though I think we can all agree there's room for improvement in client entertainment expenses." Client entertainment, the same budget line I'd slashed by 60% while increasing retention. The dinners I'd replaced with morning coffee meetings because I'd learned our clients preferred efficiency over excess. But Gordon preferred the old way, steakhouses and strip clubs, the kind of bonding that happened over whiskey and innuendo. I opened the envelope while the others were still congratulating each other. The numbers stared back at me, so small I had to read it twice. $24,000. Pre-tax on $120 million in managed assets, representing over $8 million. In fees to the firm, they'd given me less than what Marcus spent on his golf membership. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cutting through the masculine revelry. "There must be a mistake." Gordon's eyebrows rose in practiced surprise. "A mistake?" "The standard bonus for my revenue tier is between 10 and 15% of generated fees. This is..." I did the calculation quickly. "Less than 2%. The room went silent. Several of the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the holiday decorations. They knew. They all knew. Gordon leaned back in his chair, that snake smile spreading across his face. "Jane, Jane, Jane. You can't simply apply formulas to everything. Bonuses are based on comprehensive performance metrics, team integration, strategic value. I brought in 30% of the firm's new business this year. With significant support from the organization, of course. The Brenwick name opens doors, doesn't it? And let's not forget the partnerships Marcus facilitated, the groundwork Tom laid in previous years." Tom, who'd been fired from his previous firm for losing a harassment lawsuit. Marcus, whose main contribution was organizing the company basketball pool. I felt the familiar burn of rage in my chest, but I'd learned to transform that fire into ice. "I see," I said quietly. Gordon's smile widened, mistaking my calm for submission. He picked up his Mont Blanc pen, pretending to make notes on his legal pad. "Besides," he added, not looking up, "in the grand scheme of things, the difference between what you expected and what you received is just a rounding error. These things happen in finance. Don't take it personally." A rounding error. The phrase hung in the air like a poison, seeping into every corner of the room. Someone actually chuckled, Richard Hoffman, who'd once asked me to take notes in a meeting where I was presenting. I stood slowly, tucking the envelope into my jacket pocket. "You're absolutely right, Gordon, just a rounding error." He finally looked up, pleased with my apparent acceptance. "Glad you understand. Now, who's ready for drinks at the club?" As the men filed out, already planning their celebrations with my earned money, I remained seated. Gordon paused at the door, perhaps expecting me to clean up the conference room. "Aren't you coming, Jane? First round's on the company." "I'll catch up," I replied, my fingers already moving across my phone. "Just need to respond to a client email." He shrugged and left. In the quiet conference room, surrounded by the detritus of their self-congratulation, I pulled up my contact list, 83 names, my clients, my relationships. My years of work reduced to a rounding error. That night, I didn't go home and cry. I didn't call my friends to vent. Instead, I sat in my office until 3 a.m., building a spreadsheet that would become my roadmap to revenge. Every client contract, every renewal date, every personal connection I'd cultivated. Gordon Wexler had just made the most expensive mistake of his career. He just didn't know it yet. The beauty of revenge, I learned, lies not in the impulse, but in the patience. For 2 weeks after that bonus meeting, I became the model employee Gordon always claimed he wanted. I arrived early, smiled in meetings, and even laughed at his tired jokes about women drivers during the Monday morning briefings. He mistook my compliance for defeat, which was exactly what I needed. My real work began after hours. While Gordon entertained clients at his private club, the one that still didn't admit women as members, I was having different conversations. Coffee with Sarah Chen at Meridian Manufacturing, where I learned her frustration with Brenwick's rigid reporting structure. Lunch with David Torres from Quantum Solutions, who confided that he only stayed with us because of our personal relationship. A casual drink with Jennifer Walsh, CFO of Apex Industries, who revealed she'd been courted by 3 competing firms but valued my guidance too much to switch. The pattern became clear. These weren't Brenwick's clients. They were mine. I studied every contract with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. Most had standard 30-day termination clauses, a detail Gordon had always dismissed as boilerplate nobody reads. But I read them. More importantly, I understood that relationships in finance aren't bound by paper. They're held together by trust. And I'd been the one building that trust thread by thread. By January, I'd mapped out exactly how vulnerable Brenwick's position was. Of the $120 million I managed, $83 million could walk away with a simple email. The remaining $37 million had longer contracts or institutional barriers, but even those weren't insurmountable. The knowledge sat in my mind like a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment to fire. That moment came during the quarterly planning meeting. Gordon stood before his PowerPoint, outlining aggressive growth targets for Q1. "We need to push harder," he declared, his laser pointer dancing across optimistic projections. "Jane, I'm expecting you to increase your portfolio by 20%. The current numbers are adequate, but adequate doesn't buy market share. Adequate, my $120 million was adequate." "Of course," I responded smoothly. "Though achieving that growth might require some changes to our client service model." He waved dismissively. "Whatever you need to do, just don't increase expenses. We're not running a charity here." After the meeting, I made my move. Not to HR. I'd learned long ago that HR protected the company, not the employees. Not to a lawyer. Litigation would drag on for years and poison my reputation. Instead, I went to lunch with Patricia Nguyen, managing partner at Greymont Partners. Greymont was everything Brenwick wasn't: forward-thinking, diverse, and hungry. They'd been circling Brenwick's territory like sharks sensing blood in the water, but hadn't found the right angle of attack. I was about to hand them a harpoon. Hypothetically, I began over our seared salmon. "If someone could bring significant assets under management to your firm, what kind of partnership structure would you consider?" Patricia leaned forward, her interest sharp as a blade. "How significant?" "8 figures, minimum." She set down her fork. "That someone would need equity. Real equity, not phantom shares or deferred compensation. A seat at the table, not just a chair in the room. And if that someone could deliver within 60 days, then that someone would be having a very different conversation about their future." We didn't shake hands, too obvious for anyone watching, but the deal was struck over creme brulee and espresso, sealed with nothing more than a knowing look. The next phase required surgical precision. I couldn't simply poach clients. That would trigger non-compete clauses and legal warfare. Instead, I needed them to leave Brenwick of their own accord, disappointed by the firm's changing direction and lack of personal attention. Seeds I could plant, water, and watch grow into full-blown dissatisfaction. During client calls, I started mentioning subtle concerns. "I wanted to give you a heads up. Gordon's pushing for a more automated service model. I'm fighting it, but..." To another, "The firm's considering outsourcing portfolio reviews to cut costs. I know how much you value our personal touch." Each conversation was carefully calibrated, never quite lying but painting a picture of a firm that no longer valued the relationships I'd built. Meanwhile, I began documenting everything, every dismissive email from Gordon, every time my contributions were minimized in meetings, every instance where male colleagues received credit for my work. Not for a lawsuit, for leverage. The corporate world runs on reputation, and Gordon's was more fragile than he realized. By early February, the first dominoes began to wobble. Jim Johnson called me directly, concerned about rumors of Brennick's new direction. Sarah Chen requested a meeting to discuss options. David Torres asked, with studied casualness, whether I was happy at the firm. I gave them all the same response. I'm committed to ensuring my clients receive the best possible service, wherever that might be. Gordon, blind to the gathering storm, continued his victory lap from the previous year's performance. He even had the audacity to joke in a partners' meeting about keeping compensation lean and mean. The other partners laughed nervously, perhaps sensing a shift in the air but unable to identify its source. If he'd been paying attention, he might have noticed the increase in private meetings on my calendar. The lunches that ran long, the coffee meetings with competitors' business cards discreetly exchanged. The way certain clients had stopped returning his calls while maintaining steady contact with me. But Gordon Wexler had made a career of not paying attention to the details. After all, why bother when you could hire someone like me to handle them? Someone whose value you could round down to nothing. He was about to learn that in finance. It's the rounding errors that kill you. The art of corporate warfare lies in making your enemy defeat themselves. By late February, I'd orchestrated a symphony of discontent without lifting a finger in direct aggression. Gordon, bloated with arrogance from his year-end victories, played right into my hands. He started pushing harder, demanding I bring in new clients while simultaneously cutting my travel budget. Video calls are just as effective, he proclaimed during a staff meeting, oblivious to the relationships built over shared meals and face-to-face conversations. We need to modernize, Jane. Stop living in the past. I smiled and agreed, then booked my client meetings using personal funds. Each receipt went into a folder labeled Investments in My Future. Patricia Nguyen and I met twice more, always in places where Brennick's spies wouldn't venture, a dim sum restaurant in Chinatown, a coffee shop near the university. Graymont's offer crystallized, senior partner, 15% equity stake in the Midwest division, and most crucially, complete autonomy over client relationships. The contract sat in my personal email, unsigned but glowing with possibility. When can you start? Patricia asked during our final meeting. That depends, I replied, on how much chaos you're comfortable with. She grinned. We're pirates, Jane. Chaos is our natural habitat. The tipping point came in early March. Gordon announced a new efficiency initiative, code for slashing support staff and expecting account managers to absorb the extra work. My assistant, Maria, who'd been instrumental in maintaining client relationships, was reassigned to support 3 other directors. You'll manage, Gordon told me when I protested. After all, your clients are so well trained by now, they practically manage themselves. Well trained, like they were dogs I'd taught to fetch his profits. That night, I made my decision. But revenge required theater, and I intended to give a performance worthy of the stage Gordon had set. I spent 2 weeks preparing my exit package. Not a resignation letter, those were for people who left quietly. Instead, I compiled a presentation, Strategic Realignment of Client Assets. Each slide was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, hiding the knife until it was too late to dodge. The March board meeting was scheduled for the 20th, the first day of spring. Poetic. Really, a season of new beginnings. I wore my red suit. The one Gordon had once told me was too aggressive for client meetings. My hair was pulled back in the power ponytail I'd abandoned years ago when a male colleague suggested it made me look harsh. The boardroom filled with the usual suspects, 12 board members, all men over 50. Most of whom knew me only as Gordon's girl who handles the Midwest accounts. They shuffled papers and checked phones, expecting another rubber stamp session. Before we begin, Gordon announced, Jane has asked for a few minutes to present on client relations. Let's indulge her, shall we? Indulge. I savored the word, rolling it around in my mind like wine before the spit bucket. I stood, remote in hand, and clicked to my first slide. Gentlemen, I want to discuss the future of Brennick Capital's Midwest portfolio. Mild interest flickered across their faces. Gordon leaned back, preparing to take credit for whatever success I was about to announce. As you know, I've managed $120 million in client assets over the past 4 years, generating approximately $8 million in annual fees. Click. Charts appeared showing steady growth, client satisfaction scores, retention rates that made their East Coast portfolios look anemic. However, I continued, recent strategic decisions have created concerns among our client base. Gordon's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the script he'd expected. Click. 19 of our largest clients have expressed dissatisfaction with Brennick's new direction. They've specifically cited lack of personal attention, reduced service quality, and concern about the firm's commitment to relationship-based management. Jane, Gordon interrupted, I hardly think the board needs to hear about minor client complaints. You're right. I agreed. They need to hear about major client defections. Click. The next slide showed a list of names and numbers. Familiar names. Big numbers. $83 million worth of big numbers. These clients have informed me of their intention to transition their assets to firms that better align with their values and expectations. The effective date of these transitions is April 1st. The room erupted. Board members who'd been half asleep suddenly looked like they'd been electrocuted. Papers flew as they grabbed for the detailed breakdowns I'd placed at each seat. This is outrageous. Gordon stood, his face flushing from pink to red to an alarming purple. You can't, they can't, there are contracts. 30-day termination clauses, I replied calmly, which you've always called boilerplate nobody reads. Turns out, clients read them quite carefully when they're dissatisfied. You're behind this. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You've been poisoning them against us. I've been serving them, I corrected. The poisoning was all you, Gordon. Every dismissed suggestion, every ignored relationship, every time you called their trust in me a rounding error. The CFO, ancient Walter Brennan, who'd been counting Brennick's money since the Carter administration, cleared his throat. Miss Hartley, surely there's something we can do to retain these clients. I clicked to my final slide. There is. One line of text. They'll follow me to Graymont Partners. The silence was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. I'm resigning, effective immediately. Graymont has offered me a senior partnership to establish their Midwest division. The clients listed have indicated their willingness to transition their assets under my management there. This is theft. Gordon's voice cracked. Corporate espionage. Will sue you into oblivion. For what? I asked. For clients exercising their contractual rights? For me accepting a better offer? For the natural consequences of treating your highest performer like a rounding error? I gathered my things with practiced calm, leaving the presentation running on the screen. $83 million in red ink, bleeding out in real time. Gentlemen, I said at the door, it's been educational. As I walked out, I heard Walter Brennan's dry voice cutting through Gordon's sputtering, Wexler, what the hell is a rounding error? The security escort was waiting outside the boardroom, Gordon's final power play. 2 uniformed guards flanked me as I walked to my office, their presence intended to humiliate. Instead, I felt like royalty with my own processional. Employees peeked out of cubicles and offices, witnessing the spectacle Gordon had created. Perfect. He'd just given me an audience for my grand finale. Maria, my former assistant, stood by my office door with tears in her eyes and a banker's box already packed. I heard what you did in there, she whispered. The whole floor heard Gordon screaming. I squeezed her shoulder. Send me your resume next week. Inside my office, I found Gordon's head of security, Paul Morrison, looking uncomfortable as he watched me gather personal items. We'd always been cordial. I'd remembered his daughter's graduation, sent a card when his wife was sick. Humanity in small doses, the kind Gordon never bothered with. I'm sorry about this, Jane, Paul said quietly. For what it's worth, most of us think you're getting a raw deal. It's not raw, I replied, placing a framed photo of my team into the box. It's perfectly cooked. My phone buzzed incessantly. Clients who'd heard the news through the financial world's impossibly efficient gossip network. I didn't answer. We'd have plenty of time to talk once the dust settled. Instead, I focused on the symbolic act of erasure, removing 4 years of my presence from these walls. Gordon burst in without knocking, his tie askew and his carefully styled hair showing signs of frustrated finger running. You think you're clever? This is restraint of trade, tortious interference. I'll have injunctions filed by close of business. Gordon, I said, continuing to pack. Did you know that Jim Johnson's daughter is at Northwestern Law? Brilliant girl. She's been fascinated by employment law ever since I told her about some of the interesting dynamics at Brennick, particularly around compensation discrimination. He stopped mid-rant, processing the threat, or that Sarah Patel's husband is an investigative journalist. He's been dying to write a piece about corporate culture in Chicago finance. I've been so busy keeping him from digging too deep into Brennick's boys' club atmosphere. Are you threatening me? I'm sharing information, the same way you shared my value with the board, as a rounding error. I sealed the box and stood. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to let me leave quietly. The clients will make their own decisions, and we'll all move forward professionally. Or I stop being professional. Your choice, Gordon. You've always been big on choices, haven't you? Like choosing to pay Marcus Chen triple my bonus for losing money. Like choosing to take credit for my wins while I sat silent in the back of the room. Like choosing to call 4 years of my life a rounding error. His face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Rage, calculation, fear, back to rage. But Gordon was many things. And stupid wasn't one of them. He knew I'd documented everything, every slight, every stolen credit, every moment of casual discrimination that he thought went unnoticed. Get out, he said finally, and don't think you'll ever work in this town again. Oh, Gordon. I smiled, lifting my box. I'm not working in this town. I'm taking it over. The walk to the elevator was triumphant. Colleagues I'd barely spoken to nodded respect. Women I'd mentored quietly gave thumbs up. Even a few of the junior partners looked impressed, or terrified, perhaps both. In the lobby, I found Patricia Nguyen waiting with a bottle of champagne and 2 Greymont Partners fleeces. How did you know? I asked. Please. Half of Chicago heard Gordon screaming about rounding errors. The other half is already calling to move their money to wherever you're going. She popped the cork right there in Brennick's marble lobby, not caring about the stairs. Welcome to Greymont, partner. We drank champagne from paper cups while the security guards looked on, unsure whether to intervene. Through the glass walls, I could see the Chicago River, green from the previous weekend's St. Patrick's Day celebration, but slowly returning to its natural murky blue. Transformation took time, but it was inevitable. My phone rang, Gordon's ringtone. I let it go to voicemail, then played it on speaker for Patricia. Jane, let's discuss this rationally. Perhaps we were hasty with the bonus situation. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. I deleted it before he could finish. By 4 p.m., the financial blogs had picked up the story. Brenwick bloodbath, 83 minutes. Walks out the door. The stock price dropped 12% in after-hours trading. Gordon would spend the next 6 months in damage control, trying to explain to shareholders how he'd let a rounding error crater their portfolios. That evening, I hosted an impromptu reception at Gibson's Steakhouse, the one Gordon always used for his boys' club dinners. 19 clients came to toast new beginnings. We didn't discuss contracts or transitions, that would come later, in proper meetings with proper documentation. Instead, we talked about vision, respect, and the value of relationships in an increasingly digital world. Jim Johnson raised his glass during dessert. To Jane, who never treated us like numbers on a spreadsheet. Even when the numbers were really, really good, David Torres added, earning laughs around the table. I stood, feeling the weight of the moment. These people had trusted me with their businesses, their futures, their faith that I could guide them through market storms. They'd chosen me over the Brennick name, over tradition, over the easy path of inertia. To rounding errors, I said, raising my glass. May they add up to something significant. The champagne tasted like victory, but more importantly, it tasted like vindication. Every sip was a reminder that value isn't determined by those who refuse to see it, but by those who do. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and contracts and the hard work of building something new. But tonight, I savored the perfect arithmetic of revenge. Gordon's discrimination, multiplied by client loyalty, equaling $83 million in subtraction. As we left the restaurant, Patricia asked, "Any regrets?" I thought about 4 years of swallowed pride, of smiling through condescension, of accepting less than I deserved. Just one, I admitted. I should have done it sooner. The aftermath unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of chaos. Within 48 hours, Brennick's damage control team went into overdrive, but they were trying to plug holes in a dam that had already burst. Gordon sent his lieutenants to negotiate with the departing clients, offering fee reductions, enhanced services, even partnership opportunities. Everything he'd denied them when he thought they had nowhere else to go. Jim Johnson called me after one such meeting, laughing. They offered me a 30% fee reduction. I told them I wasn't interested in discounts. I was interested in respect. The kid they sent actually asked me to define what that meant in quantifiable terms. The legal threats materialized as expected. Brennick's lawyers sent cease and desist letters, threatened injunctions, and cited every non-compete clause they could find. Patricia had prepared for this, assembling a legal team that picked apart their arguments with surgical precision. Turns out, when you classify someone as a rounding error, it's hard to simultaneously argue they're integral to your business operations. My first day at Graymont was April 1st. April Fool's Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Gordon, who chose that morning to make his final play. He appeared on CNBC's Squawk Box, painting himself as the victim of corporate espionage. "This is what happens when you give people opportunities beyond their capabilities," he told the anchors, his media training barely concealing his bitterness. "Sometimes they bite the hand that feeds them." I watched from my new corner office, yes, corner, with windows on 2 sides and a view of the lake. Patricia sat beside me, taking notes. "Should we respond?" she asked. "Let him talk," I said. "Every word he says is evidence." Sure enough, the female anchor pressed him. "But Mr. Wexler, didn't Ms. Hartley generate significant revenue for Brennick? The numbers suggest—" "Numbers can be misleading," Gordon interrupted. "Revenue generation is a team effort. No single person is irreplaceable." Within an hour, 3 more clients called to initiate transfers. Gordon had just publicly confirmed what they'd suspected. Brennick saw them as numbers, not partners. Meanwhile, I was personally calling each client, discussing their needs, their concerns, their visions for growth. The contrast spoke louder than any media response could have. The transition was smoother than I'd dared hope. Graymont's operations team, led by a brilliant woman named Denise Kumar, had created a seamless onboarding process. Clients barely noticed the change except for improved response times and more personalized service. Within 2 weeks, we'd successfully transferred $78 million of the projected $83 million. The remaining $5 million stayed at Brennick due to contractual complications. But even that victory was Pyrrhic for Gordon. Those clients made it clear they'd leave the moment their contracts allowed. Maria joined us the second week, bringing 2 other talented women from Brennick's support staff. We were building something new, not just a portfolio, but a culture. One where contributions were recognized, where rounding errors didn't exist, where the person who brought in the business wasn't erased from the victory narrative. The industry took notice. Financial Week ran a feature, "The Rounding Error That Broke Brennick's Bank." The article detailed not just the client exodus, but the cultural failures that precipitated it. Former employees came forward with their own stories of discrimination and dismissal. Gordon's boys' club management style, once seen as traditional, now looked archaic and costly. By May, Brennick's board had seen enough. Gordon was quietly transitioned to a strategic advisory role, corporate speak for a face-saving exit. His replacement, surprisingly, was a woman, Catherine Walsh from their New York office, brought in specifically to repair relationships and modernize the culture. She called me 2 weeks into her tenure. "I'd like to meet," she said simply, "not to get clients back, that ship has sailed, but to understand what happened here so it doesn't happen again." We met for coffee on neutral ground. Catherine was everything Gordon wasn't: direct, humble, willing to listen. She took notes as I spoke, occasionally wincing at the more egregious examples of discrimination. "The rounding error comment," she said finally. "In the board transcripts, Gordon claimed it was taken out of context." "The context," I replied, "was 4 years of being undervalued. The comment was just the perfect summary." She nodded. "For what it's worth, the board knows exactly what happened. Gordon cost them 8 figures in assets and immeasurable reputational damage because he couldn't see past his own ego." "It wasn't just ego," I corrected. "It was systematic devaluation of anyone who didn't fit his image of success. The ego just made him careless about hiding it." Catherine left that meeting with pages of notes and, I think, a clearer understanding of the work ahead of her. I wished her luck, sincerely. Brenwick's employees deserved better than Gordon's leadership, and maybe she could give them that. As for me, Greymont's Midwest division was thriving. We'd exceeded our first quarter projections by 40%, attracted new clients who'd heard about our relationship-first approach, and built a team that looked like the world we served: diverse, dynamic, and driven by more than just numbers. The Chicago financial community was small enough that Gordon and I occasionally crossed paths at industry events. He would nod stiffly, I would smile politely, and we would orbit in opposite directions. But at the spring gala for the Financial Leaders Association, he'd had enough whiskey to approach me. "You know," he said, swaying slightly, "I could have made you a partner, eventually, if you'd been patient." "Gordon," I replied, "patience is what I showed for 4 years. This was just math." He blinked, confused. "Your rounding error," I explained. "Accumulated compound interest, $83 million worth." I left him standing there, still trying to work out the calculation. Some people never learn that in business. As in mathematics, it's the decimals you ignore that destroy you. Every percentage point, every basis point, every human being you dismiss as insignificant, they all add up. The band was playing My Way, which felt appropriate. I'd done it mine, finally, after years of doing it theirs. And the view from this side of the equation? Absolutely perfect. 1 year later, I stood in the same building where Gordon had called me a rounding error. But this time, I was on the 43rd floor, one level above Brenwick's executive suite. Greymont had just signed a lease for expanded office space, and by pure coincidence, or cosmic justice, we'd secured the penthouse level. The movers were carrying in furniture as I walked through the empty space, envisioning where each team would sit. Corner offices for the senior managers, all promoted from within. All women who'd been told somewhere else that they'd reached their ceiling. A collaborative space for the analysts, designed to encourage the kind of innovative thinking that rigid hierarchies crushed. And at the center, a conference room with glass walls, transparency literal and metaphorical. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Journal wants a quote about the Brennick anniversary. Respond?" The financial press had latched onto the date, calling it the rounding error revolution. Brennick's stock had recovered somewhat under Catherine's leadership, but they'd never regained their Midwest dominance. 3 more senior women had followed my exodus, taking their portfolios to competitors. Gordon's legacy wasn't just the $83 million I'd taken, it was the cultural reckoning he'd triggered. I typed back, "No quote needed. The numbers speak for themselves." And they did. Greymont Midwest now managed $340 million in assets. We'd won Financial Week's Innovative Firm of the Year award, More importantly, we'd proved that success didn't require sacrificing dignity, that profit and principles could coexist, that treating people as valuable made them invaluable. Maria knocked on my office door. She was VP of Client Relations now, having earned her MBA while working full-time. "Jane, your 3 o'clock is here early. Should I?" She stopped, seeing my expression. "You okay?" I was looking at a framed check on my wall, that last bonus from Brennick. $24,000. I'd never cashed it. Instead, I'd framed it as a reminder. Know your worth, even when others don't. "Perfect," I told Maria. "Send them in." The meeting was with a potential new client, a tech startup whose female CEO had specifically requested me. "I heard about what you did," she said as we shook hands. "How you turned disrespect into dominance. I want that kind of fighter managing my company's future." We talked for 2 hours about her vision, her challenges, her dreams for what her company could become. Not once did we discuss fees or percentages. Those details would come later, handled by teams who understood that relationships preceded transactions. As she left, she paused at the door. "Can I ask you something? Do you ever regret leaving that way? Burning the bridge so spectacularly?" I thought about Gordon, who'd retired quietly to Florida after being pushed out, his reputation in tatters, about Brennick, still struggling to rebuild trust in the Midwest market, about bridges and the matches we choose to light. "Some bridges are meant to burn," I said. "They light the way forward." She smiled and left. And I knew we'd gained another client, not because of our rates or our reputation, but because she'd found a firm that understood value, real value, not the kind measured only in dollars and decimals. As the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Not revenge, that emotion had burned out long ago. Its purpose served. This was something deeper. The quiet triumph of building something better from the ashes of something broken. My assistant knocked again. "Jane, the team's gathering for the anniversary toast." "Right." It had been exactly 1 year since that April Fool's Day when the joke turned out to be on Gordon. I joined my team in the conference room, where champagne waited in glasses and faces smiled with genuine warmth. These weren't just employees or colleagues. They were co-architects of something revolutionary. I raised my glass, thinking of words worthy of the moment. But sometimes the best words are the simplest ones. "To rounding errors," I said, and the room erupted in knowing laughter. May we never forget their true value. We drank. We celebrated. We returned to work. Because success isn't a destination. It's a daily choice to value what others overlook, to build where others tear down, to see potential where others see only problems. As for Gordon's rounding error, it had computed perfectly. $83 million in subtraction from Brennick, exponential growth for Graymont, and one immutable proof that dismissing someone's worth doesn't diminish it, it just redirects it to someone smart enough to recognize it. I walked back to my office, past the wall where we'd mounted our awards and achievements. But the thing I was proudest of wasn't framed or official. It was the knowledge that somewhere out there, other women were watching, learning, planning their own revolutions. Other rounding errors were adding themselves up, preparing to show their true value. The city lights sparkled below, each one representing dreams and ambitions and possibilities. I'd taken my place among them not by accepting what I was given, but by taking what I was worth. And that, I thought as I turned back to my work, was the most accurate calculation I'd ever made. Thank you so much for listening to this story of sweet corporate revenge. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this tale of turning disrespect into triumph resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about workplace justice. Have you ever been someone's rounding error? How did you prove your true value? Let's discuss in the comments.